All right, so we are back. I am picking up in Exodus chapter 9. I know for you guys it wasn't a break, but for me in recording, I took a break. So I am back. I am excited to pick up on this journey, and we are going to just jump into Exodus chapter 9. It is verses 1 through 35. We're going to cover the whole chapter in this one. So prior to this, Moses had been brought into Egypt to free the Israelites. They are living as slaves, and God has heard their cry, and He is ready to free them. But He is doing so in a way that lets the entire world know that He is the one true and living God. He is the greatest power that there is anywhere. There is not a government, there is not a ruler, there is not a country, a city. There is nothing greater than He is. And he is using Egypt as an example because he has a ruler that's there, Pharaoh, who feels like he is equal to God. So he has decided he's going to contend with God, and God said, if you want to fight, give me what you got. And so far, it ain't working out too well for Pharaoh or the people, and it's going to just continue on for some time. So far we have seen a plague in chapter 7, which is turning all the water in the Nile, which is their primary water source. This is the primary source for commerce and exports and imports, is to move things along this water in this river, and it turns to blood. So now it stinks. It's unusable for drinking, bathing, all of those things that you would need it for. You can't irrigate the lands with it. Everything that runs off, anything that touches the Nile, the water that has a source from the Nile, all their rivers, lakes, streams, and everything that comes off of this, it's blood. So it's unusable. The fish are dying, and there's a horrible smell in the earth, or in the area in Egypt. And so in chapter 8, we get into the next three plagues. So first, there are frogs that cover absolutely everything. These frogs cover everything. It's frogs all over the land, in people's houses, in the food, all that stuff, just everywhere. And Pharaoh asks Moses to lift it. He lifts it, and then they get lice or like gnats. It's like these small bugs, depending on the version of your Bible. It's either lice or gnats, but they call on the people. They're in their faces and they on your nerves and all that stuff. And so then there are flies, and these are not just, the little house flies that try and ruin your picnic, have a little bite of your burger while you're outside. These are like biting flies. So they're a pest, and they're a pestilence, and they are aggravating the people. And the animals are bothered by this. So those are the first four plagues. It is water to blood, frogs, lice, and then flies. And so in chapter 9, we are going to pick up from there. We are four plagues in. And in chapter 9, it says that God told Moses to go tell Pharaoh. And he says, again, let my people go that they may serve me, that they may worship me. It was never let my people go. It's not just give us free. It is let my people go so that they can worship. That is a reminder to us that God is asking for us to worship. God is asking us to be free from the things that tie us up and bind us, the things that we are enslaved to, so that we can worship Him freely. This is a shackles moment right here. I don't know if y'all know that song, Mary Mary Killed It. Like, that was the song for a whole lot of years. But this is so that you can break free of the bondage that you're in and worship. The goal is to worship. Not the only thing that God has ever called us to do, but it is a primary thing. And so, and he says, tell Pharaoh if he refuses that I'm going to come against the cattle. So before he touched the water, he affected the land, he affected the air with these bugs. And now he is like, hey, I'm going to hit your cattle. We're stepping it up here. I'm going to affect the things that you own. Before, I messed with the stuff that I owned, and you had your magicians feeling like they was equal to me. But now I'm going to mess with the things that you own. And so it went for the cattle. And it says that it's going to come across the horses, donkeys, camels, oxen, sheep, everything. It's the cattle, any animals that you own in mass. And not that you had to own a bunch of them. You had one donkey and you was Egyptian and you was falling under this. Your one donkey was afflicted. It is not just a single thing. It is not just, I only have one, so it's okay. No, anybody who fell underneath this was affected. And it says that there was a divide between the Israelites' cattle and the Egyptians' cattle, so that God made a distinction that he affected only what was owned by the Egyptians, not what was owned by his own children, his own people. And so he said, look, it's going to happen tomorrow. If you don't believe me, just wait and see. And so in Egypt saw that next day that the animals were dead. God took their cattle out. So only cattle that's left in Egypt belong to the Israelites. That's it. Anything else they would have had to import, anything else would have had to come in, they'd had to buy some more, they had to breed some more, they had to done some other things. But the cattle that belonged to the Egyptians was all killed that night. And so that's how the first 7 verses, like we just jump right into it. And so in verse 8, there's the next plague, the 6th plague is getting ready to take place. And so God tells Moses and Aaron, he doesn't send them back to Pharaoh and tell him what to do. He said, I want you to take ashes from the furnace. So I want you to take ashes. I don't know if this is a furnace that's a heat source for the Pharaoh's palace. I don't know if this is ashes from one of the furnaces where they bake the bricks that they need to make. I don't know which type of furnace it was or where it was, but I do know that he told him to take the ashes and sprinkle them in the air. So throw these ashes up in the air. And when he did, the dust fell down. And when it fell down, it affected the Egyptians. But it affected everybody in the palace as well. And so it broke out. They broke out with boils. I don't know what kind of boils it was. I don't know, but I know that the Egyptians had sores on their bodies. And they were open, weird, horrible sores because the magicians who had come before and were like, oh, turn water into blood, I can do that. Oh, you can make a snake? Cool, I can do that too. So they have been emulating these plagues, and now not only could they not do it for the last few plagues because God was like, I'm enough with the foolishness, man. Enough with it. I let you do your little parlor tricks. Y'all not big like me. And so he shut it off so they couldn't emulate or couldn't copy, duplicate the plagues to show Pharaoh that they had equal power. He went ahead and shut that off a while ago. But they couldn't even stand. They couldn't even come in before Pharaoh and even attempt because God was like, Y'all thought y'all was slick. You thought you was doing it, but sit down. And so they were, even the magicians, even the people who were there who were trying to show Pharaoh that they had the same strength as God, couldn't even stand next to him and attempt it because they were afflicted by this as well. So don't be playing. Don't be playing. All right, so verse 13. Okay, I'm sorry. Before we get to 13, verse 12, it says, and the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he hearkened not to them. So Moses is saying, let my people go to worship. God said to tell you that, or this other thing's going to happen. And God hardened his heart. And I know we think in our own minds about free will. Or how do I have free will if God can harden my heart? And I intently looked through all of this because I wanted to understand that. And the understanding that I have is, I don't think God made his heart hard so he couldn't do anything or he couldn't exercise his own free will. What I think was, he made a bad decision and God said, I ain't gonna mess with you. I'm gonna let you have it. And when God takes his hand, when God takes his love, when God takes his spirit out of that situation, and all you got is what's in between your ears, and what you have is what's in your heart, and your heart is evil, because it told us that way back in Genesis that the heart is evil, then you kind of get stuck in yourself. And you double down on something you didn't even need to be affiliated with. Like you feel like when you have a bad idea and God hardens your heart, it's not him saying, nope, I want you stuck to it. I feel like, based off of the study and the understanding and the research that I did, is that instead of God saying, nah, that's not who you are. Nah, instead of having just you know how they have in the cartoons, the angel and the devil on your shoulders, ain't no angel show up. So it's just you in a conversation with the enemy, and you double down on it. And what God did was he pulled himself back so that he could get stuck in the situation, stuck in the decision that he's making to prove a point. If you want to contend with God, God will let you contend. He'll let you fight this whole fight, and all he can do is stand there and watch you tire yourself out and knock yourself out from these silly punches you're trying to throw. So that's what's happening here. So in verse 13, Moses comes back and says, God talks to Moses first and was like, hey, I want you to get up and go to Pharaoh, and I want you to tell him again, let my people go to serve me. But he's not going to listen. And I'm going to send more plagues. And I want you to tell him that. I know you're going to be hard-headed. I know you're not going to listen. I know you're going to refuse to do what I'm asking you to do. But here's the next round of plagues that are coming. And so he provides him with this warning. And so Moses does that. He goes to Pharaoh. He tells him what God said to tell him. And he says, look, I know you're not going to agree. I know you're not going to listen. But God is using this as an opportunity to show his power in the world. It is an opportunity to show that the biggest, richest, wealthiest nation cannot stand against him. The ruler of this great place cannot stand against him. And if this ruler can't, what made you think that you and your little house could? And so God is using this as an example, which is why it's recorded in here. One, because this is historical events, and my God, like, why not write this down? But at the same time, it is an understanding and a reminder for us that if the biggest, richest ruler in the nation, in the country, in the world at this time, because Egypt was a powerhouse. Egypt was what it was. Egypt was it and all. That was like, this is the U.S. at the time. Like, this is the world leader here. And if they couldn't stand against God, if this ruler who ruled all of that couldn't stand against God, what makes you think you can? You might as well get on his team, because off his team is a real rough place to be. So he does all of that, and then he warns him about the hail coming. And he says, look, not only is this hail going to happen, I'm going to give you an opportunity to avoid the punishment. So he said it's going to be a hail that's going to come tomorrow. This hail is going to be so big and so mighty. It's going to be greater than any hail that's ever fallen on this land before. And the only way you're going to be saved from it is if you call all your animals and all your people from out of the field. At this time, you had shepherds. The shepherds would, put up tents, and they would stay out in the field with the animals, because you didn't just want to walk 20 miles out, feed your animals, and then walk 20 miles back in the same day. Like, you would just go and you would travel, and these animals would eat as they walked, and you would walk through certain areas and you would loop back around. And you would take them out to the fields to eat, and they would stay, and they would breed, and they would do all these other things. They would live out in the field. And so what you were supposed to do was call your people in, tell them, come on back, and be inside of the houses. As long as you're under covering, as long as there's a covering of a house, of a structure over you, not these, like a skin tent or something like that, that's not going to hold up against this hail. Not being outside underneath the stars, because this is beautiful weather. It's nice out there. So not being in those situations, but being under a house, an actual structure, firm structure, would be the only thing that would save you. And in verse 20, I want to point out, it says, he that feared the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh. There are Egyptians who at this point have said, I'm done with this foolishness. I'm listening, because this God has gotten my attention. God has gotten my notice. And I'm seeing that when Moses come and say, God said, that it happens. And if he's giving me the opportunity to protect myself, I'm going to take it. And so from among the servants of Pharaoh, they made their servants and cattle come into the houses and called them out of the field. I believe that this God that said he's going to send hail is going to send hail, and it's going to kill everybody that's out there, and I'm going to call you back in. There are Egyptians who fear God. There are Egyptians who listened and believed when God said he was going to do something. There were some who did not believe and left their people outside. And in verse 22, the plague of hail hits. So they get these baseball-sized rocks of ice that fall. And when it falls, it also falls with thunder. And when you have thunder, you got lightning. At least for this storm, they did. And the lightning caused fire on the ground. And so you have this baseball sized hail, and you have fire. The fire is running along the ground, and the hail is falling from above. And everything in the field, everything uncovered, dies. It beats down the plants. So it has now affected their crops. Anything that is full bloomed, almost ready to be harvested is beaten down by this hail and broken. Between the baseball size hail breaking up the stalks and actually literally beating it down, and then the cold that's hitting it, that's damaging it as well. And then there's fire that's burning along the ground. So their harvests are destroyed. At one point, Egypt was the place to go because their harvest saved nations. Their harvest is the reason why the Israelites are even there. And now their harvest is gone. And so it says in verse 25, and the hail smote throughout all the land of Egypt and all that was in the field. Smote means hit, struck, killed, damaged, beat down. It says both man and beast, and the hail smote every herb of the field and break every tree of the field. Only in the land of Goshen, only where the Israelites were, was there no damage. And so in verse 27, Pharaoh was like, hey, get Moses, tell them come on in here. And they get Moses and Aaron, and they come in, and he said, look, I sinned. We wicked. We messed this up. I should have never disagreed. Tell God that this is enough. Call your God and tell him he can stop. Go ahead and pray. Call this back. Break this up. And so Moses said, look, when I leave the city, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to hold my hands up. I'm going to do the thing that God told me to do. And we're going to pull back. We're going to pull back the hail. We're going to pull this back. God is going to pull that back for you. And he says in verse 30, but as for you and your servants, I know that you will not fear the Lord God. He said, I know this ain't it. I know you're telling me that you sinned against God and you want to repent. I know it, but that ain't the truth. And so the next couple passages talk about what was broken and destroyed and what, because it wasn't in full harvest, was damaged but not destroyed. Because that's going to be important in the next one. And so Moses did what he said he was going to do. And Pharaoh saw that God actually pulled back the hail and the rain. And his heart was hardened again. And he wouldn't let them go. Just like Moses knew. Just like God told Moses. So that Moses would know. Okay? And so that's chapter 9. It was a little heavy because it was a lot of verses. And there's a lot going on because this is action-packed right now. So just a quick recap. So in this, we start off with the 5th plague where the cattle is destroyed. And we see that God told Aaron and Moses, he told Moses, and Moses went to Pharaoh and was like, look, here's what's going to happen. We're going to destroy all your cattle, but there's going to be a distinction between the cattle belonging to the Israelites and the cattle belonging to the Egyptians. And only the Egyptians are going to be impacted by this. And so Pharaoh was like, whatever, man, do what you do. And so what happens is God said, okay, cool. Since you don't believe me, let's do it. And so he goes ahead and he affects the cattle, and that all the cattle die. And that's not just cows. It's going to be sheep. It's going to be oxen. It's going to be donkeys, camels. All of their animals die. And so after that, he asks, God tells Moses to grab a handful of the dust from the furnace, throw it into the air, and it turns into this very small dust that travels. And when it lands on the people of Egypt, they break out into these boils. They get this really bad skin illness. And the magicians, the people who have been coming to Pharaoh saying, nah, we can do this. That God ain't that powerful. We can do this. They've been saying that. And now they affected, and they can't even get out the bed to come and see about what's going on. And so after that, God warns Moses, hey, I'm going to send the hail. It's going to wreak all types of damage. All types of death and destruction is getting ready to happen. But Pharaoh's not going to give in. And Moses goes to him, tells him what's getting ready to happen. He's like, I know it ain't going to work, but it's cool. And so they go ahead. God moves, and the hail falls, and there is thunder, there is fire, and so the ground is burning, and that there's hail falling from the sky, and then all of the animals and people who are out in the fields who have not been brought in for shelter, because they were given the opportunity to come in and shelter, and some people didn't believe, but some Egyptians believed and brought their animals and their cattle in, and those animals and people were saved. And so they they go out, and so at the end of all of this that's happened, all this destruction and death has happened again. Pharaoh was like, all right, we sin, call off your God. And Moses was like, I know you're not for real, but all right, cool. And so he does it, and Pharaoh wasn't for real. And so we see that these plagues are going to continue. So what I want us to remember about this is, sometimes when we are going through some things, it is God trying to get our attention. Sometimes we are going through some things, and when God is trying to get our attention, it's so that He's showing us that He is God. He is a great big God who is capable and powerful and can do some stuff. And we need to be on His side. The other thing I need us to remember, especially as Christians, especially as people who are believers and profess God, profess Christ and the love of God, remember, there were Egyptians that believed because they saw the move of God. There are people out here who believe in God because they see God moving. And when you decide that you're not like me, or you decide that you're not this culture, you decide you're not the right race, you decide you don't have the right look, your self-righteous self got in the way. God didn't say that. Those people who believed what God said He was going to do were saved. And when you get in the way because you decide that they can't believe because they don't look like you get in the way. So don't get in the way of anybody. Make sure when God tell you something, you tell them people, and you allow them to do it in the way that God has for them to do. Okay? So I want y'all to be blessed. I am excited to be back. And go get you some saved friends.